Daily Solutions Podcast.
All right. Welcome to the Daily Solutions Podcast.
Hey, everybody.
This is Ashkahn.
I'm Ashkahn.
All right. And I'm Graham.
Yep.
And we have a good one for you today from our listeners out there. What are the dynamics and ethics of opening a float center in close proximity to an existing one? Can they coexist in cooperation instead of feeling like adversaries or competition? Specifically, in a location with a significantly smaller population size than, say, Portland.
Okay.
Which I don't know why they chose that city, but...
First of all, I would tell this person that they need to work on making their questions more succinct. That's the first lesson here. It's an interesting question. And you know, like we say on this show, fundamentally, we don't really know or have a good idea because there's not a lot of cases of this happening out there yet. Like, we don't see a ton of float centers right next to other float centers to really know how well they do or how much it affects them. So it's a little bit based off of kind of our hunches on the situation.
Yep. So just like 90% of what we talk about, we don't really know what's going on. But we do have our hunches, and we have kind of our base level philosophies, and we have things that we've turned to and examples we've seen for sure. So I guess, first of all, smaller population than Portland can obviously mean a lot of different things. And we should talk about this idea of saturation involved in opening float centers too. Like at some point, right, like if you actually had one float center for every person in a town, that's too many float centers. Like, that's not good, right? And you're gonna hit too many float centers well before that. But just as an example of there is such a thing as too many float centers for an area, or even too many float tanks.
Yeah, and you know, that saturation point will also change based off of how many people know that floating exists and how many people are actively floating. You know, we're still in a period where only a certain percentage of the population is even aware that this concept is a thing. When you compare that to things like massage or other industries, like, you know, you'd be hard pressed to find someone out there that hadn't heard of massage before. So this is a shifting number too, I think, as this kind of industry develops.
And I guess I was kind of launching right into things and almost taking our opposite side of the argument. But for those of you who are just joining us or don't really know our background on policies like this, our general stance is that cooperation is the way to go. And we fully believe that opening float centers in the same city is oftentimes good for both people, and that there is great cause to collaborate and rejoice in being in this same awesome industry that you're part of. And in our minds, very little reason to treat each other as competition or as the enemy. So that's like very much our strong stance on this. And then there's all the little details that go into it from there.
And that especially makes sense when you think about this concept of saturation and population, and you have to factor in this huge variable of how many people know about float tanks. And unless that number is 100% or close to 100%, like there's much more room for things to grow. And that's kind of the benefit of having other float centers open up. That's somebody else out there who's spending all day, every day, trying to get people to know what float tanks are and to come experience them. And so, like, when you view it from that perspective, like another float center opening in your town is somebody else actually spreading the news on floating and getting more people to know about it and kind of expanding that pie rather than taking a slice of it.
Yeah, for a long time and for many places, I've been fond of saying that our greatest competitor is not other float centers. It's just general lack of awareness, right? It's not even like the massage industry or something like that is a competitor to us as much as just people who have no idea what we do or that we even exist. And so in that sense, again, that idea of opening up and marketing to more people is exactly what you want to do. The flip side is that, you know, I think that there's right and wrong ways to also go about it and respectful ways to enter into the same, you know, not even the float industry, but any industry and open up in the same town. You know, I've heard a lot about tattoo places opening up, I was going to say as well. And the kind of ethics that go into opening a tattoo shop in maybe a city that only has one other tattoo shop. And it reminds me very much of kind of float centers as well. But, right, like, I mean, first of all, you don't want to, in secret, go and rent a space and start opening up and only tell the other float tank center that you're opening near 1 week before your grand opening and invite them out or something like that, right? That would be the absolute wrong way, I would say, to open in the same city as someone else.
Yeah, just kind of a douche move. Like, you'd be surprised how much when you go approach float centers, if you're thinking of opening up near some others, how friendly they'll actually be. Most of the time, people tell us that, not only was it not like weird or awkward, but in fact, they went and got drinks right afterwards. And it was actually like really nice to be able to talk to someone and, getting started on that foot and kind of being familiar with the people around you and realizing that they're your allies more than your competition is going to help you in the long run.
Right. So I guess first off, even from the beginning, treat this as a possibly beneficial relationship, and possibly you're actually making some lifelong friends here. Again, people who've decided to get into this strange, salty industry probably share more in common with you than the bulk of humanity. And you might be surprised at who's just around the corner and is your next float neighbor. So going into it with that attitude and actually trying from the beginning to make friends and approach it assuming that they're going to have a good response to it rather than assuming they'll have a bad response is definitely step one.
Would you say at this point there's any way to be too close to another float center?
I mean, I would say if you're the only two centers in town and you're right next door to the other one, right? It's sort of like that, at the point that you have as many float centers as people, that's too much. There's definitely a way to be too close to another float tank center. What too close is obviously very wishy-washy, and it depends a lot on population density too. It's like you telling me about your journeys through, what was it, Hong Kong?
Yeah.
And how, you'll have literally a Starbucks on the same block because one is on the ground floor and another one is however many stories up, 200 or something.
Yeah.
So, if you're 200 stories away but on the same exact block as another float tank center, maybe that is okay. So I think it depends a lot on your situation. For a smaller density town, definitely being a few miles away would help. Or, I've even seen people who just out of respect want to open in the next town over in the cases of places that only have maybe 10,000 or 20,000 people, something like that. But for 100,000, 200,000 people population city, again, several miles away, it seems like a good step. But it's not even to say that would impact business. That just sort of seems offhand, like what I would treat as a kind of responsible move.
Yeah, and again, you might, if someone does open very close to you, you might see a dip at first, but then you might see things expand more because so there's double the amount of effort to get the word out about float tanks happening right in your neighborhood.
Yep, and although the question specified 4 cities not like Portland, I should say that we've every time that another float tank center is opened, we've kind of seen an uptick in our own business and in interest, and I think that comes directly as a result of more people finding out about floating through the other marketing efforts and through more word of mouth being out there and just more people in whatever city it is actually hopping in a float tank, which is sort of how this whole industry spreads anyway.
Yeah.
So there you have it. Fair and balanced, 100% unbiased report.
Yep, that's right. This is all based off of data, not our own just random opinions.
But I guess one last thing on that front too. I kind of don't even care what the data is. Like for Float On, it's, take what lessons you want away for your own float tank center. But for Float On, if I found out that, we have a 3% decrease in business when another float tank center opens in town or something even more dramatic, we'll gain 20% if we're jerks to them and treat them as competition and really launch this harsh advertising campaign against them. And we'll lose money if we don't do that. I still would want to be friendly and not launch the asshole news campaign against them or advertising campaign, right? That's just... Some things, I think, also come down to just the way you want to do business and can't even come down to the bottom line.
Yeah, and I would say in more cases than not, those things are not at odds with each other and more typically line up than you would think.
Yeah. So, my example is if things actually were very clear and spelled out like that. But again, I think when it comes down to it, the benefit is in you get to be a nice person and also it helps your business.
Yeah.
And it's great when those two things align. So... best of luck for you out there, opening in the same smaller city as another float tank center, and I hope that you guys get to have many great adventures together, and hopefully share some nice conversations and meals.
All right, if you guys have any questions of your own, feel free to submit them at floattanksolutions.com/podcast.
Bye, guys.